has met me at least once. If you haven't, then it's probably maybe a good thing to some people. But you know what? The genesis of this talk was back probably about 3 or 4 months ago, talking to Greg Grimes at Southeastern, Southeastern Gnomes. And we started having a conversation, just kind of a dialogue and some shop talk. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I need to do a little bit more work on here, a little bit more research in here, because we have been fertilizing for a long time. Well, you know, and we have done some traditional stream fertilizations since the 1930s. Is there benefits? Is there some inhibitations that we need to be looking at? Is there issues that could actually take us to another level or a higher level? And so, you know, I kind of, well, let me take a even a step back from there. Is that aquatic ecosystem has done some really cool stuff. One is that I come from, it's allowed me to go to all over the country sometimes, and you know, to actually work to remove phosphorus a lot of times with a lot of Florida. We do a lot of TMDL work, total maximum daily load work. So we're actually really trying to target, and it's interesting to work in different sectors of our industry and to see what their point of view is actually, you know, is what is success and what is not. It kind of reminds me, I should have brought this slide, but I didn't, and I thought about this, I thought about it just a second ago. Is I seen a cartoon once where there's this guy that stepping out of a boat, walking on water, and I think we all know who we're talking about here. And the crowd's clapping, excited, and then you see a little fish down underneath the water with the little caption that says, "Hey, you want to put some drawers on?" And the point being is that is different points of view at different times can be viewed as success, and to kind of elaborate on that. You know, we just talked, it's just cool because there's so much in this PowerPoint, and I will say that this is a day-long tech training that we do in our office, and we did it for another conference that made it down to 4 hours. Now I'm crunching a lot of information down into 1.5 hours, so I am going to be moving along pretty fast, and if I skip something or not going and define something enough or elaborate enough, please raise your hand, and I'll kind of go back to it. But and at this conference here, it's been neat, even with the few speakers we had this morning, how much of overlap that I have on this PowerPoint to what has already been talked about. Example like Swingle. Kind of the history of fertilization came back to Swingle back in the 30s, and if you guys have not read this, you need to. It's kind of neat. It's worth some armchair coffee reading if you ever have time. Well, Swingle was is an entomologist actually. It's kind of interesting how he got into the aquatics field. He was actually on a sport fishing club and seeing that some ponds actually reacted better and caught more fish, and he kind of did a little bit more examination in that, and you can see these old pictures. I think they're kind of cool. I always like the history of things, kind of see where we came from, see how we need to go into the future. But he found, and with some other colleagues, you know, phosphorus is the limiting element in fresh water. Well, he sees that as you add phosphorus, your planktonic bloom increases, and particularly towards green algae, and you're able to raise more fish. He was able to go from 100 to 200 pounds per acre to 580 pounds. And so he was on to something. Now, his focus was, during that period of time, was to get protein on a table. It's not recreational largemouth bass production. So his kind of focus was a little bit different towards, you know, to what it is now, but it is kind of interesting to see where we come from. Now, the goal of fertilization, we all know, adding phosphorus, increasing green algae. What we do is planktonic algae above the food chain, increases zooplankton growth, small fish, and then smaller fish get eaten by larger fish. You know, a lot of the focus towards these, and when you think about it though, the purpose is to go after the smaller gape-sized fish and also the 1 to 3 inch, or even smaller, I should say, 0 to 3 inch, the small fry. Now, I put this slide in here as kind of an example, so don't hang me up with these numbers. I know we got some feed guys in here and we can elaborate, but this point of this picture, this slide, is to show you, as you add fertilizer at the bottom of the food chain, how it can, as a 10x, which is a general rule in biology, of energy, how it's pushed up the food chain and creates pounds of fish. Now, this here is showing you just simply that you're getting a lot of your energy from the sun, so therefore it's not a cost. And it's a reduction of cost by adding phosphorus. So, great. So our goal is to increase our biomass, fish production. We add phosphorus in fresh water. Great. Sounds good. This is why we haven't changed much since the 1930s, and our ways we look at things. Well, working on the other side of things and other sectors of this industry, we kind of learned a lot about phosphorus in a way that has been pretty interesting. We found out that if you continuously add phosphorus over periods of time, that you can actually make it limited. And when you do that, cyanobacteria do a very good job of outcompeting greens. So, and you see here this 20-to-1 ratio. Now, it's a ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus. And we're finding out that it's kind of neat that if we can have green algae when the planktonic algae, or when the water is phosphorus limited, but as soon as that exceeds that time period at this ratio, we're seeing that we're pushing us towards more of a cyanobacteria. Now, the cyanobacteria, just to go step back, what are they? I say cyanobacteria sometimes they say blue-green algae. Well, it's kind of a class of their own. Right now they're currently under bacteria, but next week they may be under, they've kind of moved around because they do a lot of similar characteristics to bacteria and algae. They do photosynthesize, and they are capable in some species of nitrogen fixation. This is kind of big because this type of algae is able to grab its nitrogen a lot from the atmosphere. It's not necessarily dependent on nitrogen in the water quality itself, unlike green algae. And as you can see, back to the ratio that we were discussing earlier, that is, if you make phosphorus not limiting, push it towards, and you continuously have inputs of phosphorus, that you can actually shift to a non-benign type of algae. Well, I want to look at cyanobacteria, blue-green algae a little bit more. It's kind of interesting. These little critters are really, really, as you examine them, they're kind of fun to, you just got to respect them because they've been around for a long period of time. They have a vacuole in their bellies, which a lot of scientists have been really hanging on that, but we can understand that. And what it does a lot of times is actually creates the way they have their buoyancy in the water column. So as they go up and go photosynthesize, carbohydrates start to fill this vacuole, stomach, and they slowly just become heavy, but they don't sink all the way to the bottom a lot of times. A lot of times they'll go just slightly below the top of the water. And then to get out of the sunlight, because if they're up in the sunlight too long, they actually will get sunburned. And that's when you take the pigment away, and that's why you get the blue-green out of here. And it's kind of interesting. I think it's cool, just because if they don't get out of the sunlight for a period of time, go below the water column, kind of digest, and as it digests, they lose those carbohydrates and then float again, come back up to the surface. So it's kind of a neat survival mechanism that they have. Now, that's a lot of these planktonic cyanodes. So there's some other that are in a higher level, but it's so I don't want to encapsulate everything on that, but it is some advantages that they have.
Matt, they'll also change color when they start to decompose and die.
Yeah, very good.
Of course you know that.
Yeah, thanks for explaining. Anytime you want to chime in, that'd be good. It's a good resource. Now,
Too late for that, isn't it?
yeah, he's already in. No, Cody's he's a good resource to have. If you haven't met him, you need to. He knows a lot about this. Cyanobacteria has actually been around for a long time. They have been here. They're actually one of the first life forms that are actually able to photosynthesize on Earth in fossil record. So they've been around a lot longer than we have. And there's some actually correlations to biblical times of water turning to blood, and a lot of scientists think that is a cyanobacteria bloom.
I think Jesus did that.
Yeah, he could have. He could have. But another interesting form that they have, and that is because they've been around. If you look at some oceans, like the difference between Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean compared to the Pacific Ocean has a lot more basically hazardous creatures in it that have toxins. They feel a lot of times that ocean is actually an older ocean, so they have actually been able to develop these characteristics into that ocean itself. So it's kind of a neat way of comparison comparatively to Atlantic to the Pacific. Well, cyanobacteria, although they don't do it very often, and it's pretty rare, they do the same thing. There's a lot of them that are being studied now. The real big one, and you can see here, you can read through there, like some of them have issues with skin, some of them have actually some liver toxins, and some of them have a neurological toxins. The big one, I guess that's the point, getting a lot of studies BMAA. I'll talk about it here in a couple of slides. This guy here, if you guys have been to an aquatic plant management conference, then you know Dr. Rogers. And if he was here, he'd really laugh if I got a photo of him. But he was actually on NPR the other day, and he was talking about during Science Fridays, about how he was able to see that during each extinction there were fossil records of increased cell counts of cyanobacteria, and he thinks it's a huge contributor to the extinction of dinosaurs because of a lot of these hazard algae blooms are algotoxins, harmful algae blooms, sorry. Now, it didn't take long. That's really impressive with this on a slide. It didn't take me long to define that we are actually more and more getting these closed body of waters. You know, this is pretty cool. Lake Erie with a satellite image. And if you see that they're all over the country. You got, it's Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Great Lakes. I think Texahoma got closed. That it's not just regional either. It's all throughout the country. And also I want to mention too that they're seeing them in oligotrophic lakes, meaning really pristine lakes. And what do you mean by that? Because we're back to that ratio, guys. And we're back to that ratio between phosphorus and nitrogen. It doesn't take a lot of times what the trophic status is. It's just a matter if you push it towards a phosphorus limiting to a nitrogen limiting lake. Now, this guy here did some really cool stuff in the Northeast. He was able to find that he was seeing some lakes that had known algae, BMAA, toxic algae blooms, and he was found that ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, he found a higher, extreme high amount of people actually living on the lake were getting Lou Gehrig's disease, and he was able to do a kind of a link towards this toxin. This Professor Bergman, now She looks like you want to have a beer with her, I'm sure. But I've seen that, and I had to put it on there. She was doing some work. She's out of, I think, Sweden, and she was doing some work in Guam, and they were finding out that the cone palm, which is actually on their state flag, was creating a algae bloom inside the root system of that palm, and creating some blue-green algae in it, and they were getting a 50 to 100 times greater abundance of ALS and Alzheimer's in that island. So it is something to look at. Very rare, but I wanted to have those slides just to show you the capabilities of cyanobacteria. But the take-home message, if I could say, is that let's think about this. We're doing some nutrient augmentation at the beginning of the year, or later on in the summer. Let's say you don't get as much flow, so you don't get as much flushing. Your clarity, as what you're trying to achieve, is decreased. Your thermocline has increased. There's a lot of variability in that. So the time of year also we're finding on a lot of these lakes are changing its algal community. And not only if the age of the lake is also a contributor too, but as you can see here, this is a very unscientific slide, but it's my point of it being is, as you can see, that later on when you don't have as much flush, or that you could be creating a higher influx during parts of the year that we need to maybe start to take a look at. Now, inflow could be a contributor to is point source nutrient. This is kind of fundamentals here. But what's interesting to me was, and I've been in the industry for a while, is in working now with phosphorus a lot, is the amount of phosphorus of different things. Is that leaves are actually a contributor. We heard this morning that feed can be. We're proving that every day. It sounds like that's going to be a really good thing. But not so much. But actually, waterfowl. This is interesting, guys. Waterfowl can poop up to 92 times a day.
Who counted that?
That was my joke.
Charitable master's thesis.
Yeah. You imagine that guy out there with a clicker? Got him. I got this one, guys. Yeah. But they have taken actually, I did some math here. It's pseudo math, and it's napkin math, but it'll take 1 million gallons, 1 acre foot. If that poop goes in there every single time, that duck never leaves the water, that it'll take 1 million gallons, it'll take it from oligotrophic to hypertrophic in 1 year. I thought that was pretty interesting, how much a waterfowl can contribute to the amount of nutrients into the water. Now, I didn't mention earlier, but I needed to, when phosphorus is limiting, the golden rule that we've all came around, that 1 pound of phosphorus can create 500 pounds. Now, time of year, I'm going to go back here. Time of year is kind of is interesting, and we need to be looking at this. We're seeing a lot of times that we're getting a high influx towards the end of the year, or end of the growing season, and we're contributing that, and it makes total sense when you think about it, towards nutrient recycling. And if you don't know what, I think we all pretty much know what nutrient recycling is, so I'm going to skim through this a little bit. Clarity basically decreases because we're trying to get an algae bloom. Thermoclines is a direct relation to clarity. It'll increase, so the volume of water below the thermocline increases. And when you do that, then the sediment-water interface, guys, becomes anoxic. And when it becomes anoxic, it loses its charge. It becomes from oxidative to a redox state. And when it goes into a redox state, iron will actually release every bit of its phosphorus. And it doesn't happen it pukes it up. It will just throw it up in 3 days. It's amazing. As soon as this charge changes, it's like a battery down there that will release all this phosphorus. Now you can release a lot of this phosphorus, and a lot of it will stay below the thermocline, but a lot of it doesn't. So you can actually get a tremendous amount of phosphorus later on in the year just due to actually what was bound in the spring coming up in the fall. And again, as that phosphorus number increases, your nitrogen has to increase. If not, you're going to push things to a non-benign source, or maybe you lose a little bit of money with cyanobacteria. I want to say something too I missed, is that cyanobacteria are not very digestible by zooplankton. So if you have a bloom that's green water with good with what we're trying to say 18-inch, 24-inch, whatever of clarity with green water, that zooplankton may not be able to digest that water as well as with green algae. And that's been done tremendous time and time again. There are a few out there zooplankton that do well with it, but the majority of them do not. So that is a fundamental thing I probably left out in the prior slides. So if you are trying to increase the bottom of the food chain sterilization program, you may not be able to achieving your goals. Now, of course, we talked about nutrient recycling. What we can do to prevent this is we can put in a bottom-based aeration system. It will keep phosphorus fine, especially in the sediments, increase habitat for zooplankton, and we can talk about benthic organisms another day, but that's something that's pretty neat coming along. But I will say this also. We know it does a great job. If you poorly design one, it actually can push you over the envelope, meaning that the sediments properly sized bottom-based aeration or destratification system goal is oxygen to the sediment-water interface. If you're not getting it, then your sediments are still releasing phosphorus. And as it does that, basically it'll go into the bubble plume and be pumped up to the surface. Now, if not poorly maintained, a lot of systems aren't, the diffusers aren't using the correct amount of air to the diffusers, and we use what is called the Darcy equation with that. But an easy way to see if you are having nutrient recycling issues is with a DO. Is getting dissolved oxygen to the sediments. See if you have oxygen down towards the bottom. Now, you can also use it with conductivity meter with ORP, but I'm not going to get into that. But there are some other ways to do that. But a simple way is just to see if you have oxygen down there. Now, how do you know if you're indicating, if you're a manager, you just want to take, if you're seeing if you are having non-beneficial algae blooms or cyanobacteria. Well, you can easily simply just see productivity in trend lines with zooplankton rates. The zooplankton net, you're able to take that out, see and measure the amount of zooplankton being produced at certain times of the year, and be able to trend that year to date. And if you see it decreasing, then you probably need to adjust. You can do some water monitoring. That's pretty simple in there. And sometimes there's some conversation right now about taking small fish and then doing checking what they're feeding. If you are getting them, again, we talked a little bit about nutrient recycling, but there's also some neat stuff that we're doing. And that, remember, it's all about a ratio. And that's what, even though you're sometimes wanting green algae, you may still need to bring down phosphorus to get it back to that ratio. So some binding agent, ironically enough, may be beneficial, especially towards that phosphorus element, to bring it down back to that ratio, promoting, what you're trying to do is promoting the green algae in your system. Now, there's also, and some interesting, some papers coming out on some other industries of changing your fertilizer programs during these times of higher phosphorus, of using a higher nitrogen fertilizer instead of the traditional high phosphorus fertilizers. That was to maintain this ratio that we're trying to find. So on that note, I hope that and the whole point of this talk is to kind of give us some. This brings us back to the original thought process, tweak it a little bit, know what we've used now, some understanding some new science, and maybe we can take it to another level. This is hopefully a good conversation piece towards a few people in the industry. So, thanks for having me here, guys.